they're going to move forward with the law enforcement with the Navajo Nation Police Department to gather more information for the database. And the upcoming report is coming up for I think it's going to re-round to the first quarter report, I believe. And
Okay.
that's what we're working on. And another question, well, I went aside from this, I wanted to ask if there's a another office space I can work at. It's kind of a little disrupting working at NTU and with the project itself. Um, but that's the current update I got. Also, the interview for the researcher, we had to redo the questions on that one. So Jason should have that this week, and then we're gonna reschedule the interview for the three selective researchers. But I do know that we can lend over the what do you call that letter, like a letter of interest, the resume. I want to ask if you wanted a copy of that.
That's a great question. At this point, so would the resume be for the individual who was hired?
No, they'll be the ones that are being selected. There's top three.
Okay.
So they did their evaluation on each of them. HR did their meet. So we have three that are ready to be interviewed.
Okay. Um, yeah, sure. That'd be great. Just redact any like personal information.
Oh yeah, that definitely.
Okay, appreciate that. That would be great to know. Um, some of their expertise, if they have any experience in this field or some collaboration. I was in a meeting all day with Epidemiology Center and our cancer uh, prevention epidemiology team. And so we are going to try to integrate some of our best practices um, with our partners. So we already have, an active participation with NAU, actually their team there with Dr. Bauer, Dr. Christensen at Diné College helped assist MMDR Coalition to develop this framework for the database. So it'd be great just to continue to collaborate with all of the epidemiologists across Navajo Nation and in the border towns. I didn't realize how many of our Navajo relatives are actually in this public health realm. So it was really great to meet some of them and the work that they're doing. So I appreciate that. All right, it looks like, let me just go one more time to who's on the call. Perfect. Kobe will be not here with us. And I know that our team is they're overviewing President Nygren's action on the legislative branch budget. So they'll be focusing on that aspect, and the way that helps MMDR is if we get any funding, like operating funding has been a challenge these last, let's see, 10 weeks. So we haven't been able to assist with any type of flyers, radio announcements, support. And we've been trying to do the best we can with the zero operating budget. So appreciate everybody on the call who continues to support this work in your own capacity. I know Shanella Laurel and her team hosted the Arizona Missing Persons Task Force there in Flagstaff. And we had a great turnout from impacted families and the task force. I'm part of the task force on the policy team. We did identify some critical areas in federal, state, and tribal laws that need and policies that need to be reformed so that our families receive the justice that they're looking for. And that it's not some type of statute, some outdated statute that's hindering the prosecution and sentencing of those who have, inflicted pain and violence in our communities. So appreciate that. I want to just get a quick take in terms of the room. Hold on. So is it Sergeant? Can you just identify yourself for the record and just let us know um, who you are so we could add it in?
Yes, good morning, Delegate Crotty. This is Dwayne Hogue, Police Sergeant for the Navajo Nation, also the overseer for PIO.
Okay, perfect. So do you have any updates for us? Shiaj, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself. I think, is this the first time you're on the call with us?
Yes,
Okay, so yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself to our community here. And if you have any updates, I haven't received an alert for a missing relative really since I'd say the end of October. So if you could give us an update, that'd be great. Appreciate you being on the call.
yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Dwayne Hogue, Police Sergeant for the Navajo Nation. Tohodli Nation, Tkanizatni Bashishin, Izatlana Deshe, Tlashe Deshinale. I'm originally from Tisaspas. I have been with the department for 7 years, a sergeant for 3 years. Currently been assigned under the PIO to assist with Chrissy Largo. And as far as from my understanding, this task has been given to me by the Deputy Chief, Leonard Williams. And I am currently looking at some of the things that we're going over for the PIO situation, including posting for the missing persons. And I believe the responsibility for the missing persons still lies with Julia Wana. So we're still working on some of the announcements when it comes to the missing persons. And I'm not too sure why they haven't pushed out an alert yet, but I'll look into that and see what we can get. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate it, Sergeant. I do, in my notes, we do have and following and supporting a family of an endangered youth. So could you let us know who is tracking? Let me pull up that information real quick. You don't have to give us any, no, we're not talking about investigation or anything that's happening. What we just want to make sure is who is the lead investigator, or if you could let us know if they're working with an advocate. So let me just pull up the name. Let's see. So just age 14, Jesselyn, if you could, with your team there, just provide an update on some of the activity and who is the point of contact for that case, that would be great.
Delegate, do you have the last name for Jesselyn?
Let's see. Jesselyn James. And if in the chat, if you could just share your contact information. Our team here will, our staff here will gather that, and we'll make sure that you're part of these emails when there's requests for information.
Okay, this is Jesselyn from Tuba City, 14 years of age. Just want to meet a friend,
Oh,
McDonald's.
yeah, you don't have to discuss the case
Okay,
here because this is,
yeah.
but
I
just work
really
with your
don't
team.
have a name for who's assigned to this one here, so
Okay.
I'll figure that out and we'll get back to you.
Okay, and are you able to use the chat feature in the Zoom?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so please just place your information on the Zoom and then our team will forward you this information. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do, I appreciate Sergeant that you're on the call for today. Our focus is the Title 14 and Title 17 amendments. I do believe Gemini has created some stuff for us to review. So let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so you could see what Gemini has created here. As always, they always tell us this is just like for a summary to review. We're going to go over the updates to the Navajo Nation criminal code. So just make sure you have that information. All of the links are in the chat, or check your email for the documents. Everything should have been shared. So what we're going to do is, let me just start. Okay, hold on, folks, sorry. How's my screen? Are you able to see it, or is it the Zoom?
We can see it good.
Okay, all right. So I don't know what I did on my end because I can't see it. Oh, there we go. Right. Apologize. So here we go. So for our time frame here, we're here till 10 o'clock. So really we're going to focus on areas of reform. So the statute of limitations, this amendment and this movement is eliminating the statute of limitation when it involves murder and sexual crimes against children. In terms of the investigation, it does establish a Department of Medical Examiners, which has been in development for over a decade. We'll add on new offenses such as human trafficking and strangulations will be defined. And when it comes to victim rights, it'll enhance protections and notification requirements. And when it comes to kidnapping, we'll modernize some of the definitions and the luring in quotation statute. So I'm reading from the slide deck for those who are on the call, and for those who are able to get on the Zoom and see the screen. I hope that this is helpful, as we're not going to cover all aspects of the amendment, but the focus is really on the work we're doing for the Missing and Murdered Task Force. On tomorrow's call, that would be, this leadership meeting with Law and Order, there's going to be other areas of focus. So what you don't see in this slide, and if you have any recommendations to either some of the language or other areas that we should work on amending in the future, we definitely can identify those areas, especially since we're wrapping down the end of the fall season. So this is our first quarter, and we'll be moving in January is the beginning of winter, and that's a time for us to really do like a lot of reflection. So in this season, we really look at the implementation of these laws and how individuals are working together. That's in line with our Navajo Lifeway and wellness model of Nisahake es Nahat Ina and Sihasin. So we're in the season of Ina and preparing for Sihasin. So let me move down. I wasn't fancy with the slide deck. Maybe we'll get an intern in the future to help, but this is the best we could do. So let's talk about elimination of statute of limitations. So this focus is always like justice for the victims of homicide. So where you'll find in this large document, and I encourage you to, we'll be, sharing this slide deck on our Google Drive for those who want access to the information and not able to click on the link or get an email. So where you'll find the murder code is actually, so this is how we read it. It's like Title 17 of the Navajo Nation Code, Section 303. And so basically the old law And this was a challenge, and this continues to be a challenge, and this has impacted Navajo Nation's ability to prosecute. There's training that we've had on the Federal Major Crimes Act, why Congress implemented those restrictions on tribal nations for prosecuting particular crimes. And definitely the major crimes also limited the length of time that tribal nations can sentence individuals. So there is a long history of injustice on what has contributed to the amount of violence and lack of justice on our nation. But in terms of when it's coming to Navajo Nation, what we want to do is, in the extent of those federal major crimes, what are we able to do as a Navajo Nation to scale up to meet the needs of our people? Because historically, and there's another training and education on the challenges when our federal U.S. Attorney General declines a case. So the old law was a 3-year limit on prosecution. So some of the great work that we've been able to collectively work together with the Office of the Prosecutor and the Office of the Public Defender is the new law. There will be no statute of limitation when it deals with murder or a sexual assault crime against a child. Prosecution can commence at any time. And so the big area and where we need to work with our legal team is what happens to cases that have been impacted and families that have been impacted before this amendment was approved. And so when it looks to retroactivity, we're looking at what are some of the legal constraints to apply to past crimes. There's legal areas like due process, there's legal areas of, the evidence, testimony, how the case was handled. Those are all a factor when it comes into prosecution. And so my hope is that could be one of our future trainings, is what the Office of the Prosecutor for Navajo Nation looks at to have a strong and potentially successful case, and have our U.S. Attorney Generals give a high-level training on what they look in a case and what have been historically some of the challenges, because the way that our police department and criminal investigators initially with the police reports and the investigation do impact the likelihood of future prosecutions. So it's a whole system that needs to work together. And so while we're trying to create opportunities for families, we need to also make sure that that whole system is scaling up so that they all understand the current trends. What are some of the challenges, especially if you cannot put a law enforcement officer on the stand, and that really can impact the case. So other homicides are manslaughter, vehicular and negligent, and these are just extended to 6 years. And it was it was also the 3-year statute of limitation. Now, the reason why manslaughter, vehicular and negligence are not part of the no statute of limitation is there's an assumption that these cases, first of all, will be reported, and how those cases are investigated has a different, and by no means am I an attorney, but I'm learning, have different facts that that impact the case. So again, that will go with the prosecutor's education to the community and to the task force. So I want to pause here because each slide that I have is just a snapshot of some of the major amendments when it comes to the work of missing and murdered Diné relatives. So I wanted to see if any of the task force members and community relatives who are on the call, if you have any questions or language that you specifically had issues with when it comes to the law. And if you need me to pull up the law to share screen, or if someone has that handy and could help, that would be great if our relatives here want to actually see the language in the law. The floor is open to anyone who has a question or recommendation.
Hey Chanel, this is Laurel.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me? I don't have anything, like I just have a personal matter that just came up and also a meeting at the same time.
Yeah.
But I was maybe you could take a look. Another recommendation is if there's not a whole lot to adjust within this particular statute, there is take a look at the sentencing laws on it, the
Okay.
language around that, because I think there was pieces that needed to be adjusted there, because it said up to 9 years, but it can be changed based off of the prosecutor's decision and things like that, where it might not be as friendly to victims as we previously thought. So maybe if you can put those things side by side, people would have more recommendations on an update.
Okay.
Hey, that day.
Get it. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Be well. Thank you, Chanel. Okay, so on my notes I wrote, let's compare the sentencing law. And I think that would be great to understand then what would be the Navajo Nation's prosecutor's discretion. Are victims part of that collaboration? Because the intent is to make sure that if the prosecutor develops a type of agreement, a sentencing agreement, that the victim has the right, the victim and the survivor have a right to be engaged in those conversations. And also we're looking at what happens when they do not agree with the sentencing, especially when it comes to murder. Last week, a discussion, and with some of our cases, a discussion on the death penalty has arisen, and that's usually in the federal prosecution. We'll talk to the office of the prosecutor. There are some federal laws that let the Navajo Nation enter in agreements with the federal prison system. So if we're getting these lengthier time provisions, and we could also get clarification in terms of, for some of these more heinous crimes, how is Navajo Nation going to prosecute concurrently, or if the federal government declines, what would be some of our options? So I will definitely get and request some additional information from our team here on what we can do to make sure that the victim's voice and survivor's voice are involved. Okay, so here's what I'm supposed to tell you, that we have been advocating that it's insufficient for egregious crimes, especially the murder of Navajo children. And so this also allows cold cases to be pursued. Some of the cases and can be very tough for all those involved are like the abduction and murder of Tiffany Lee and her grandma Alice, and how their murderers tortured and abused them, and how then the Navajo Nation responded. And so there are some pretty heinous cases, like with Ash and Mike, where the families have asked leadership to take a stronger stance when it comes to our victims of violence, and other families of murdered relatives are also speaking out in terms of how they want Navajo Nation to be more aggressive when it comes to these offenders. So slide 4, we'll move, hold on, let me try to get it together. And if this conversation, activates you, or you feel like you need a time to take a break and take a breath, most definitely, if you're viewing this online or on a live stream, you can always, pause the discussion, come back to it, take some time to center yourself, go out to Mother Earth, make sure that you, connect with others, because you're not alone, but this also can activate some, feelings within your own body. So make sure you're stretching, breathing, taking care of yourself. If you're stressed out, this may not be the best time to be participating in this conversation, or at least listening, and know that if you're not actively asking questions, you could always do so in the chat or email, and we'll definitely want to make sure we have your recommendations and future trainings in mind. This is so the reason why I'm saying that is it's also very, very challenging for myself. And I want to appreciate that actually the victim witness of Northern Arizona last week provided an emotional animal for me to help me regulate with my emotions. And so I do want to recognize, although we don't have that capability as we do hybrid, to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Because we are discussing some very serious aspects of the work that we collectively do, and it's an area that I am not. It's an area that definitely has had a huge impact in my life and in the professional work that we do as chair of the task force, in hearing about all of the cases that our relatives are perpetuating violence on each other. So when it's Navajo on Navajo crime, it's very challenging to make sense of why individuals have committed these acts. So we'll move forward with slide 4. This is professionalizing death investigations. If you do not know, on Navajo Nation, we work on resolutions. That's what the council passes, is eventually it's called a resolution, and that amends Navajo Nation law or statutes. And so when those are amended, that becomes a law of the nation. The executive branch, under the president and vice president, they have an area of, and I'm not sure if I could say authority, because I don't find anything in the Navajo Nation law or statute when it comes to the authorization of an executive order. But we do have an executive order, like for our missing and murdered and their relatives, for the executive branch to create that community response plan. And so, but in addition, we also have an executive order that is, I don't know, maybe about 13 years old, or maybe even 15 years old, that was signed by former President Dr. Joe Shirley. And in this executive order, it directs the Navajo Nation criminal investigators to not only investigate major crimes, but also they are the Navajo Nation medical examiners. And so what we learned is that this creates a huge caseload for our criminal investigators, because they have to determine that not only do they need to investigate criminal activity, but they also then need to pronounce or announce death by other causes. So what the envision was creating this new Department of Medical Examiners. It'll be established within the Division of Public Safety. And we'll need to see and work with Division of Public Safety on their plan of operation and how they propose to integrate this department into their division. And their mandate will be to investigate all suspicious, violent, and unexplained deaths. So given the authority, the chief medical examiner may issue death certificates. And then the authority to take, hold on. Sorry. The authority to take possession of bodies for medico-legal inquiry. And then the cultural mandate is all of the investigations must respect Navajo culture, traditions, and beliefs. And this could be a challenge because of the common knowledge of how families and communities talk about death. But there are teachings and there are practitioners out there who have an in-depth knowledge of customary rights. And so they can come on board and have helped us with some of the trainings on how we discuss relatives who are no longer with us and have transitioned, and also how the families can move forward when there's an investigation, and how that may or may not conflict with our values and our teachings. So we want to enhance that opportunities for our families so that they understand how this impacts investigation and what is some of the goal, especially when we talk about DNA or new technology that may not have been available at the time. And there's been a determination that with collecting more evidence that some of these cases will be solved. So it is definitely a sensitive topic. It's being discussed within the medical examiner field. Recently, as of Saturday, the Coconino County, or I'm sorry, I think it's called the Northwest Arizona Council. So it's some of the commissioners from the area. They received a report from Navajo County medical examiners, and the sheriff there, working with the attorney general, and they've presented to our task force in the past, are actively working on cold cases and trying to identify those remains that currently do not have any hits when it comes to DNA. But with new technology, their hope is that they'll be able to identify some of those relatives' remains in their care. Okay, just going to go to my little notes. And so this moves the nation towards scientific death investigation to better determine the cause of death when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous person cases. It also creates a legal pathway for, this is the hard part, oops, is it? I don't know how to say the word. But just basically to exhume the body, exhumations if strictly necessary for justice. So those are the areas that we want to amp up. And we do know of cases where this will be critical to the case. And so we are working through some of these very sensitive conversations and how to support the family in this very hard time. So I wanted to pause here and see if anybody had any recommendations or insight when it comes to the amendment creating the Navajo Department of Medical Examiners. Okay, no worries. Again, very heavy areas. And so we'll keep moving along. I'm just trying to figure out how to make this fit my screen. Oh, it's not working with me. So slide 5 is addressing the missing in quotations, trafficking and kidnapping. We want to, unpackage that word missing to make sure in the definitions it doesn't mean like someone within their own agency has removed themselves from their families. And so we want to make sure that we're consistent. And so some of the updated statutes is Navajo Nation was one of the first tribal nations to criminalize aspects of human trafficking and what that meant. And so these laws and to update the statute are going to include, and you'll find them in Title 17 of the Navajo Nation Code, Section 653, new specific offense criminalizing recruitment. And what does recruitment look like? We're talking about grooming. We're talking about coercion. We're talking about the active pursuit of an individual. We're also talking about transport. We've talked about this aspect a lot when it came to our relatives being targeted and by some of these treatment centers that are down south. It's our understanding, there's still some of these treatment centers who are operating. And so we consistently have to monitor and make sure, however, these businesses, because they do like rebrand themselves, they rename themselves, their tactics are still similar to what we've experienced in the past, and also how their children and families are being impacted. And so also it will include the harboring for forced labor or commercial sex. On Navajo Nation, we have had some incidents of forced labor, from dealing with families of our missing relatives who family member historically was a sheep herder and would go out and work with different ranchers, and the family, felt like they were being exploited or, not being paid a living wage. There's also been discussions of in some of our communities where especially targeting our relatives who have some mental challenges and are exceptional, and they don't really comprehend that they're actually being held there, and not realizing that they should have a choice if they want to leave, or when they leave, they should not feel scared that if they leave, some type of violence will be they won't be a victim of violence. So it is happening on Navajo Nation. And so we hope that some of these updated statutes will help us prosecute these individuals and also track how law enforcement is developing their police reports, and then how we could monitor some of these situations, especially when it comes to our vulnerable populations, our elders, our children, and those who have exceptional talents. So kidnapping update. So this is one of the areas that's a win because we removed the statute of limitation. So if the prosecutor and in their facts and with the police report and investigation are able to prove that the kidnapping with the intent for sexual contact. And so some of these areas, what I'm learning from the law and in the courts, that words, not just like the meaning that are sacred, but the way you interpret the words or the intent is important, and it can make or break a case in terms of how these definitions are being applied throughout Navajo Nation. And that's certainly going to be an area where we monitor with our database so that we could continue to provide training, not only for law enforcement, social workers, the community, and so that we all live in a safe in a safe environment. So some of the areas that have escalated or have just really, we've seen a huge increase of reporting is when it comes to digital safety or luring. We do have cases of our missing that have been lured utilizing social media. So these new laws are targeted on making sure it's a criminal offense to try to lure minors via electronic device and online sexual exploitation. We have in the past criminalized what we call revenge porn, and that means an individual who intently shares or threatens to share sexual content that was provided through consent, but are now victimizing the other individual in a way to harass, coerce, or blackmail. So these types of crimes will not have a statute of limitation, and it also will increase Navajo Nation efforts on their digital investigation, how we identify IPs, how do we integrate with known sites such as gosh, what's the name of that gaming Roblox, something that sounds like that. And their creators have explicitly stated that they know that sexual or child sexual exploitation is happening on their platforms, and no, they're not going to create stricter regulations, and that might be, and so what advocates feel like that might be actually the intent of this industry on how they interact with minors and children, and how they've normalized sexual exploitation as just a part of the experience of online gaming or online chatting. And so we've seen this in other areas, but where we've had to like help and assist national movements to close down certain sites. But the dynamic of the internet is when one site closes, 10 pop up. And so we're really looking at how how funding is, how these websites and platforms get their funding and go after that aspect for individuals who are utilizing these sites for exploitation. So Navajo Nation definitely needs to amp up and monitor this type of activity. We've been hearing from our schools that there's an increase of children accessing very violent sexual exploitive material, and especially in the realm of anime porn, where violence is being normalized, and then the children at school are then victimizing classmates and trying to replicate some of those actions, in the school grounds. And so we have heard from advocates the need to educate when it comes to this type of violence against our children that are happening in the school setting, and also just information for, let's say, some of our grandparents who are guardians, or parents where they may feel that that's more of like a cartoon that their child is watching, when what the reality is, it's really very exploitive sexual content. Yes, so that will be part of the new laws and some joint efforts in our prevention work. So these updates and what's important for the work that we do is that a missing person have been acknowledged that they're often the victims of trafficking or online luring. And now the law, we have the tools that are needed to charge criminal crimes against these predatory behaviors, which is a win, but also you can think about, so how many years there has not been recourse for victims of crime when it comes to these areas. So I'm going to pause here. Are there any questions or recommendations? Okay. And just make sure you're keeping notes. If there needs to be training in the future, then we could provide that. In the past, we've been able to train advocates, train law enforcement, train FBIs, agents, train community members. And so our goal is to really figure out who we could identify to provide this training to our community members so they completely understand what are the current laws and how advocates can support them navigating through the system, and also how the Victim Rights Act is being integrated to make sure that they're aware of the process and aware of what their rights are. So I'm going to move on. Nobody has any questions or comments? I know it's very heavy stuff on a Tuesday morning, but I appreciate that you're on the call and reviewing this information with us. Okay, let's see. I'm going to try to just reformat this quickly. Hopefully it'll just help with. Okay, taking deep breaths. Okay, so we'll go on to strangulation and domestic violence. This is so important. So I need a breath because we're helping a family. There's a very recent case where was a Navajo mother who was strangled to death. So it's a very fresh case, and so what I'm gonna do is take a few breaths. Just pray for her children and her family. So we're going to have a new law, and it's going to be called strangulation or suffocation. You're going to find it in Title 17 under Section 316.02. So strangulation is statistically a high predictor of future lethal violence, murder in domestic situations. And that is a national fact. It's something on Navajo Nation we need to monitor, that we need to train our health providers if they're asking questions when it involves not only violence but strangulation, that there's resources available, and that individuals who are in a domestic situation and in the past have either been strangulated or threats of strangulation, that this is a very high predictor of future lethal violence. And so the penalties now will be mandatory jail time. And this is an area where there's discussions with the Office of the Prosecutor and the Office of Public Defender when it comes to fines, because it says, this is what states in the law now. It says fines cannot be converted to community service unless manifest injustice is proven. So this is still areas where we need to have discussions with both entities, with victims, and understand what these penalties are, like what is the intent. And so there's a lot of course, victim advocates in their opinions and with family members or those who have survived the crime. And also on the flip side is the Office of the Public Defender in asking, well, if there's a fine and the individual cannot pay, what are going to be some options so that that individual is successful in their release and is not default in some of the requirements that the court has issued. So that is a conversation that we do need to have in terms of if individuals find themselves that they are not financially able to pay these fines. And so what we're talking about, instead of like community service, it could be something like mandated treatment, mandated like halfway house, mandated some type of services that will help that individual understand the ramifications of their actions, and how through uh, evidence-based treatment that 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 they're in a that they're set up for recovery and restitution, and instead of committing more crimes or trying to re-victimize their former partner, and could be their current partner depending on the situation. So on Navajo Nation, do we have halfway houses? No, we do not. Do we have offender training? We do. And we would start looking at the data to see how efficient that training and support is given to offenders. And we'll talk with some of the surrounding services just to see what are the best practices. So that's something that we could collectively work on. So this closes the loophole where strangulation was previously treated as a simple battery. It is now recognized as severe, life-threatening, violent crime. And that's why a lot of public education needs to happen, and for survivors of strangulation to tell their stories, and the amount, how quickly someone can succumb to strangulation. Also needs to be part of the education, as it is definitely a life-threatening violent crime. So I want to pause here and see if there's any recommendations. I don't see anything in the chat, or if there's any questions, or if you've read this particular section. And what we'll do is we'll also ask she has Ms. Juanita Martinez there with the Office of the Prosecutor Victim Services Advocates on how they're incorporating the Navajo Victim Rights Act when it comes to these new laws with strangulation.
Good morning, Shema. Dr. Ha. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some input regarding some of the changes that are being made to the Title 17. We are currently going through the Victims' Rights Act and incorporating, of course, with discussion through Chief Jackson and also Deputy Chief Denise Billy. We are finding a way to incorporate the Victims' Rights Act so that it's written into the Title 17. Right now, the Title 17 is the draft has been a final draft has been provided, I believe, to all the Law and Order Committee members. So any changes that are being recommended are being taken into consideration, and Deputy Chief and I are having a sit down to see what we can do in terms of adding the language, the proper language to the Title 17, Shema. And that would be an update. And of course, as we're going along, we certainly will welcome any sort of recommendations that you all might have. And Nadal Shama, we look to you for your leadership and your guidance also regarding this particular and very sensitive law change.
Appreciate that, Shiaja, for that update. If we could, while your team is reviewing these suggestions and hearing public feedback, especially tomorrow with the oversight Law and Order, what my goal is to create, we do have resolutions from all of the 5 agencies that represent all of the 110 chapters, asking the Navajo Nation to implement stronger laws, enforce, prosecute and to provide services, victim services. And so with that thread, we're developing what we're going to call the Victim Rights Act Fund. Maybe it'll be called, I'm not sure if it'll be called violence prevention. Maybe it'll be called just a way to support implementing and monitoring how the Victim Rights Act is applied and enforced. So in that thread, I know we helped this year with additional vehicles for advocates. I would like to see if there's a trend, because every year I try to, find additional funding for the Office of the Prosecutor. If collectively we'll try to get that information and look at if there's like a 5-year trend, and then that would be a good way for us in the future to secure funding for the Office of the Prosecutor to make sure that you're able to implement the Victim Rights Act. And so we'll have conversations because you're limited in terms of federal grants when it comes to prosecution. This office is the responsibility of Navajo Nation. So I would want to make sure that there's general funds now into the future to help and assist. So we'll continue to have that dialogue after we get this big, what we learn from the amendments, then we'll have a better sense of what type of funding needs to be committed. And then just looking at trends, every year, if you're getting the same funding every year, it doesn't deal with inflation. So there's actually some financial algorithms we could use to every year have a percentage increase to match the inflation rate or, consumer price index. But I want to make sure that you're aware of those conversations and how we want to take it now to where it would be a mandatory, what we call set aside. It'll be used for the intent that has been identified. And I'm going to be developing some resolution language where I'm going to ask the people to vote on it to make sure that that they would only be authorized to change it in the future, and it would have to go back to the vote of the people. Because how important this work is in making sure our communities are safe, and how important it's apparent on how funding is used. And so to keep everyone accountable on the type of services they're providing to our community. So we'll continue to have a collective conversation on that.
Thank you, Shema. I appreciate the insight, and also look forward to the collaboration and also the work that we can incorporate to protect all our victims and also all our vulnerable population. Shema.
Oh, I appreciate it. Anyone else on the call have any questions or recommendations when it comes to these new laws? I just want to appreciate who our team, our decades of team members who have helped. It's been a collection of former attorney generals. I know former Attorney General Ethel Branch was part of some of these discussions back in, I think she started hosting Navajo Nation Public Safety Summits either in 2015, 2016, seeing the need to ramp up our criminal justice system. We worked a lot with Raquel Chi with the judicial branch to help coordinate. These discussions were part of the initial founding elements of the Danette Action Plan. And so it has taken many people, many different versions to get where we're at now. And so I just want to make sure that those entities are, they have been part of the solution. And so now it's time for council and leadership to act in incorporating these new amendments and getting them into law and to make sure that they're fully funded. So we will go to slide 7, which is victim rights and protection. I believe this might be our last, either second to the last or last slide. So it involves our victim rights and protection. This is an opportunity for those who are familiar with Navajo Nation Victim Rights Act to look over some of the new language or maybe recommend language that you want to tighten up. We do know that our advocates have in the past provided some challenges. And so like training that would be needed is how Navajo Nation, defines who what constitutes some of these crimes, especially when it's when it's a domestic partnership and other laws that do not recognize, for example, same-sex, although it says same-sex marriages, there has to be a discussion on how the law identifies same-sex or self-identified partnership, so that when there is a crime committed, they also are able to benefit from the Victim Rights Act and also benefit from some of the new language when it comes to, or some of, just some of the language when it comes to domestic violence and sexual assault, especially, in some of the restraining orders, some of the laws that can be filed, and also how we could keep our community members safe. So this is important. So the right to notification. So victims, and this is where we want to monitor and enforce, must be informed of a defendant's release or escape. This is important because in COVID, we did see a wave of Navajo detainees released from the detention center. And I did have to ask the Office of the Prosecutor to step in to make sure those individuals, survivors or victim of violence, were notified. That amplified everything that was going on, not only with COVID, but now, individuals contacting me directly and saying, this individual is like at my door banging to get in, and I don't feel safe. I thought they were in jail. I don't know if they escaped, and I'm in fear of my life. So we want to make sure that there is a notification and that there's enough planning, because there should be a plan for any individual who's released. They should have some type of plan for resources, and that gives detention center enough time to notify the victims or survivors of the crime. And this goes back to what I discussed earlier, that the right to confer. So now victims or survivors have the right to speak with the prosecution or the Office of the Prosecutor regarding the case. Protection orders. I love all these big words. Irrebutable presumption for crimes like stalking and strangulation, and the court shall, that's a good word there, shall, that means you have to do it. May means maybe, but shall means you do it. Presume a protection order is necessary upon conviction. And that's important to note so that we know part of that protection plan, safety plan, and when that individual transitions out of detention, that their victim or survivor will have a protection order, and can work with an entity to understand how that will protect them, not only here in Navajo Nation, but federal laws also not mandate, but allow for other entities to recognize Navajo Nation protection order. And also, if you have a protection order in one of the counties or other states, that Navajo Nation also recognizes that protection order to make sure that you're safe. And there is some federal language that if an individual, let's say, crosses jurisdiction, it can, and at times we've prosecuted on some federal crimes that are available with the Federal Violence Against Women Act, to scale that up to a federal crime and for them to be prosecuted federally for breaking federal law if they're crossing jurisdictions and violating their restraining protection order. So it's a very valuable tool that we know sometimes is not enforced or very complicated. And so with our victim advocates and the act, and now going out to the community for education, we hope to make sure that this is enforced and monitored. So this, so what I'm supposed to say is, survivors of violence are not left in the dark regarding the status of the perpetrator. And that's really important, especially for some of these more heinous crimes. Helps with the anxiety to know where the offender's at. And it also gives some agency to the victim or the survivor if they feel what steps are necessary for them and their family to feel safe. It gives them that information so that they can make the best decisions for their safety. Do we have any questions or recommendations on this slide? We do have one more on a summary.
Hi, Chanela. I don't know if it's on this part, but on the actual document that they revised and was shared with us, at the bottom, there was a little bit of a concerning thing, which I feel like should be addressed right away. But
Okay.
on there, it says Department of Corrections and Navajo Nation Police will work together to figure out a notification system. And I think that's just passing the buck, especially on Title 17. Just to continue nobody doing, because right now it's being passed back and forth between various entities and nobody's taking a responsibility on it. And then my other thing with victim rights is it's stated in multiple areas. So this is for Title 17. A lot of the a lot of the entities are only applying this to victims of domestic violence only or family violence. They're not extending it to any other type of victims, which is a little bit concerning because we do have a lot of stranger stranger attacks, and they're not being afforded the same rights. So in my recommendations that I sent, I don't know if you got those, I sent it a while back for the updates on victim rights, was to create one for all crime instead of posting it in multiple places where it can be, I guess, translated by whatever program in their own way, because I've had clients be denied some of these things because this state's only for DV. And then, so maybe if we brought it all together, that would be more helpful. And I had a whole list of those recommendations in that email too. So I hope that can be considered. I know it's not perfect, but also maybe a creation of a regulation for when your rights get violated.
Okay, appreciate that. So I've made a note on how we're tracking this information, and I'll definitely make sure that in our victim rights side that we start gathering what because really the intent is any crime committed on here on Navajo Nation, and it's not a limitation. Even if entities are scaling up, there should be a plan for all crimes committed on Navajo Nation. And we will have to specifically work with the oversight on this notification system. I'll tell you the challenge on being in the legislative as a policy and monitoring, like as oversight, is we'll direct executive programs like Department of Correction or Navajo Nation Police Department, and they simply will not create that system. So some of the tools that I have being on budget and finance and working with this group is then I will start making conditions of their appropriation and or like legislative concerns, and then we start reducing their budget and look for another entity that could create those systems and make sure they're responsible. And so there is some reform happening within our system when programs are like non-compliant or not being accountable to some of the laws. They could say, we don't have the capacity, but we have found, best practices where you may not be able to hire individuals here on Navajo Nation, but that doesn't stop a department from, partnering, just like what we're doing as a task force. We literally have zero operating funding, but we're still able to work on these issues. And, because we're partnering with nonprofits, we're partnering with universities, we're partnering with community advocates, and collectively, and that's the same type of energy we want to see from Navajo Nation executive programs to make sure that they're in compliance with the law, because when they submit their budget, that's what they're getting their money for. And so I'm really drilling down on the amount of money they receive and what services they're actually providing and how do we monitor. So we do have some budget policy folks who are providing some insight to myself that I could share with leadership and how we keep everyone accountable. But we'll definitely incorporate those suggestions into our recommendation tomorrow at the oversight. Thank you.
Shema, if I
Yes.
may.
You may.
So the Office of the Chief Prosecutor recently, the VWAs, the victim witness advocates, we recently met with Department of Corrections with the Dr. Gray Eyes present, and we talked about the communication that regarding defendants when they are going to be released to give us prior notice, and also the correction officers, probation and parole officers also were in attendance. So just that brief presentation, that brief discussion that we had, we are currently collaborating. I mean, it's not a perfect system, but it's working right now where the Department of Corrections calls us ahead of time. This individual will be released within the hour, 2 hours, and gives us a heads up regarding the release time. And so we are able to make connections with the victim immediately and notify them of the defendant's release. So what we have right now is working, but of course, we still need a lot of work to get done so that it's ironed out completely and there's a structure in place. But I do agree, if we haven't solidified a structure and have all the stakeholders buy-in, I certainly do agree that this should be a much smoother process. But Shema, we are doing something to ensure that the victims are being protected, at least from the prosecutor's um, part. Thank you, Shema Shahab.
Thank you for that, Juanita. Um, do we have any questions or any more recommendations for what was presented? Okay, not hearing anything. Let's take a 5-minute break just so everyone can stretch your legs, get yourselves back in kind of get you guys back into a positive mindset. So we'll take a 5-minute break. It's set 9:47 right now, so we'll come back at 9:52. A quick 5-minute break. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so the time is now 9:53. Let's see here. I'm looking through the chat. I don't see anything in the chat right now. Was everyone able to get the copies of the draft legislation for Title 14 and 17 along with the list of changes made to the to those titles from Office of the Prosecutor? I just want to make sure, because if anything, I can email that to you guys. Give me 1 second.
Hi, Tatiana, is that the one with the 300 and some pages?
Hey, Lorene. Yeah, this is the documents that were sent over during the Law and Order committee meeting and the letter that
Okay.
was sent to Delegate Crotty as well.
Oh, okay. All right, then, thanks.
Okay. So, sorry, I'm gonna go back to our last slide. So we could just wrap up the summary of impact. Let's see. So we'll strengthen, so this, strengthens sovereignty and safety. Law enforcement is no longer hindered by short time limits on murder and trafficking. And with our MMDR database that's going to be housed at Navajo Technical University and the hiring of researchers, policy analysts, we'll be able to monitor the cases and start seeing different trends, especially from the point of the crime or alleged crime to be reported, how it navigates its way through the Navajo Nation system, who's actively monitoring and making sure it's deferred or, referred to like FBI, and then what is the conversation FBI agents have with Navajo Nation criminal investigators when it comes to these major crimes and working with the U.S. Attorney General's office. So we'll definitely be able to monitor and shed light on that system and process. Because we have 3 different state U.S. Attorney office, they all collect data differently. Our hope is that one day Navajo Nation will have our own Attorney General's office when it comes to Indian country violence, or at least some coordination. But right now we do have to decipher 3 different data sets that are collected in very different ways. We want to increase, better science for the medical examiners and have individuals who have that expertise who could bring in the newest technologies, the newest trends on how to solve cases, and also looking at working with the universities who are conducting research. So the government, we'll have contracts with like government agencies, and it's just like any dynamic area and scope. The research into institutes are having, they have the cutting edge technology that we should, really invest or consider with Navajo Nation. So we're just not relying on what, let's say, Quantico or others. So it'll be really interesting to see how this partnership with the University of Texas, as they're processing our DNA, and then what are opportunities there. I know at the New Mexico MMIP task force, the coordinator did provide an update. Their grant is dwindling down, and so it would be interesting to see what our Navajo Nation Division of Public Safety's next step when it comes to working with this new Department of Medical Examiners and how they are going to provide a faster turnaround time when it comes to DNA evidence. If you're new to this group, I've shared in the past, it took Navajo Nation criminal investigators 8 years to process evidence on a case involving one of my missing grandmothers. And so at that time, our family, we had to coordinate, the search and rescue. We had to coordinate, helping the criminal investigators get supplies. So when they were investigating, they had, the material that they needed. And so there's definitely areas where we have seen improvement, but that comes with funding, investment, and making sure that funding is properly used. And we continue to have leadership support, and most importantly, the people, our people who continue to want to have safer communities. So going on to, targeting gateway crimes like strangulation and luring just prevents future tragedies. It also, puts on everybody's radar that these crimes will be not only reported, but that they will be investigated and prosecuted, and that Indian Country Navajo Nation is not like a haven for these types of crimes, and those survivors will have some sort of justice. And the last thing I'll mention is we are our group through the violence prevention aspect of the Danette Action Plan, and we're convening in our winter gathering on Thursday at San Juan College. We are working with the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women in helping to support the conversation with the Epstein's victims. We do know he had a ranch that was close to our Navajo communities. There has been reports of, files or individuals who've been identified as possibly Native American. And so we're working with our coalition to make sure that there's community education and what happens if you're triggered or activated, if you've been a victim of the Epstein trafficking network, you may or may not be aware, and then what type of resources are available for those who have been trafficked, and will continue to engage and work. Matter of fact, the New Mexico Missing and Murdered Task Force is meeting right now with our legislators to try to get some additional funding to help support our families who have been victimized. So that is our Title 17 update. I know it's a time check, 10 o'clock, if you need to transition off to your next meeting, but we'll stay on the line if there's any recommendations. Moving forward, we're going to look at our winter or our end of the fall schedule. We have some upcoming meetings, and so if these Tuesday conversations are canceled, we'll hopefully give you enough proper notice. We do know some of our partners go on their, end of the fall hiatus and come back at the beginning of January, the beginning of winter. And so we want to recognize that everybody works at their own pace. You come to this discussion where you're ready, but we just want to make sure that this work is moving along. We're always trying to do better to communicate. We do press release. There's a web page on Navajo Nation Council, and if any of our partners like NTU, hopefully they'll create some type of resource page that's actively monitored, and they'll help be like our hub when it comes to our missing and murdered and their relatives, prevention, accountability, and healing. So are there any other last comments or recommendations before we end today's call? Okay, so Andrea, thank you for your comment. You'd like to add in the discussion bootlegging laws. Yes, bootlegging does lead to other abuses. I do know. And so staff, if we could just identify this, we could pull the last attempt to regulate bootlegging. There was a time that FBI and there was a active effort to address bootlegging. So we could hopefully pull up some of that history for those folks who were involved with some of those FBI missions. And I do know, I believe it was the 23rd Council, the late delegate Nelson Begay proposed a bootlegging legislation that if you were convicted of bootlegging, you would lose your home site lease. You know, that becomes very a sensitive discussion. And so we could start having discussions, especially in our violence prevention, about bootlegging, or if there's a way to connect it with our work with our missing and murdered. Because they also, I do know in the work that we did with, you know, the hemp and, you know, the illegal activities here in the Shiprock area, that there definitely was, you know, trafficking, there was kidnapping, there was labor, and definitely bootlegging was involved in those discussions. So appreciate that, and we'll put that on our radar and get help from our violence prevention team of the Denton Action Plan.
Okay, I added
Sorry.
that to the list.
Sorry. Anything else? Okay, everyone, take a moment to, you know, just be thankful for today. You know, with it's cold weather, but once you're in the sun, it's giving us that warmth, that strength that we need. And so just, you know, look for Look for 5 things you see in your room. Look for 4 different colors. You know, hear 3 different things, taste 2 different things, and, you know, feel and reach out to Mother Earth. And those are great ways to regulate yourself. So be well. We'll talk soon. If you're able to get on the call tomorrow, that would be great. Or we'll be recording, and we'll also email out those high-level summary notes on next challenges and get an idea of what the rest of our December calendar looks like. Okay, everyone take care. We're also going to incorporate some of this information into our testimony. There's going to be a federal consultation on the Office of Violence Against Women. That's going to be in January. I believe Chair Charles Newton is going to attend in person, depending on our budget. And then I'll look at my schedule, and I think I'm still going to attend virtually because of my commitment as also chair of the New Mexico caucus. And we need to make sure that our Navajo priorities are part of those discussions here locally. So everyone be well, take care of yourself. Hagwan